What's up guys, Noor here and welcome to Book of Showtime chapter 38. As always, if you enjoy these videos, be sure to like and share with your friends, and if you have a topic you'd like me to cover for Book of Showtime, be sure to leave it in the comment section down below, or and you're ready to reach me on social media, or the Book of Showtime Discord. So my friend Vinny says, here's a Halloween prompt. What would you consider the most overrated horror game that gets more praise than it ever deserved, and in contrast, what is the most underrated horror game that's truly great but not enough people have tried it? For me, most overrated is probably Outlast, and most underrated is Dreadout. To me, Outlast really didn't do much of anything new or interesting, yet it had people salivating over it when it came out, and I never saw the appeal. Dreadout, though, uses some classic survival horror principles. It stands out as being unique for its monster designs, music, and unsettling pacing. It avoided being predictable over and over, and that really impressed me. Outlast is a fair game to say it's overrated. In fact, I think Outlast and games like Outlast only benefit from the rise of YouTube and Twitch. These class of games, the Outlast games, the Slender Arrival type games, and even to an extent Amnesia, which you can kind of blame. If you want to blame anyone for that class of game, you can blame Amnesia. But they're basically walking simulators with jump scares. Amnesia not as much, but it seems like nobody's been able to really replicate what Amnesia was at its peak. I will be honest and say I had interest in playing Outlast, but that was only because I was a Twitch streamer at the time, and I scare extremely easy, so it's good for content. While I think the story and setting for Outlast is decent, the gameplay isn't enthralling at all. It serves its position of being a fun game to stream, but otherwise, Outlast is a game that can ride the pine this October. As for Dreadout, I actually never played it, and I think I actually watched Vinny and her sister play this, so I have to take her word at face value. It looks too scary for me to try. Also, it's cool that when I went to the Steam page, they have a post for the Eid show. Shout out to Digital Happiness for this. Which, how do you have a company named like Digital Happiness and produce really scary games? I don't get it. Also, mentioning Eid, I got a quick little wholesome story for you guys. I remember, my nephew, he lives with us. He's like 10 years old right now. And I remember one day I walk out in the living room. It's late, it's after 10 o'clock. He's still up. I was like, shouldn't you be in bed for school? He's like, I don't have school tomorrow. And I was like, why? And he's like, it's the Eid. And I'm like, the Eid? And he's like, yeah, the end of Ramadan. I was like, I know what the Eid is, but we didn't get the Eid off growing up. So that was really, really cool to me. I had to, when I was a kid growing up for the Eid, I had to get my mother to write a note, giving me an excuse for the day for the Eid. And honestly, growing up Muslim post 9/11, that was an underrated horror game. But let's move on. But Vinny, you should actually come to New York and play all my scary games for me. I'm too scared to play some of these things. Now for my picks, let's get into my overrated pick. And I actually have two games, because it was hard for me to actually pick overrated games in the horror genre, as to me, most of these games are pretty properly rated one way or another. I could have gone with Old Reliable and slandered The Last of Us Part 2 some more, because that game is objectively outclassed by a ton of games, but I want to take a break from that. Now today I'm actually going to go with another PlayStation exclusive game, and that's Until Dawn. Remember at the top of this video we talked about games that only benefit from Twitch and YouTube? Until Dawn is another one of those games. The plot has a decent twist halfway through, but the gameplay itself is almost non-existent. They were better off making this an FMV type of game, as the actual sections where you control the characters, they don't really have any substance to them. It's just kind of walking until you get to a QTE section. I'm surprised Until Dawn is as highly regarded as it is. This game feels almost like vaporware in a sense. It's just to show off what the PlayStation 4 can do. Until Dawn, it does have very good graphics. The presentation of the game is solid, and it also makes good use of the PlayStation 4's motion controls. But on the other side of the coin is, I really didn't like most of the cast, and I get that the writing is intentionally supposed to be corny, which I hope it is, but it's hard to want to keep most of these characters alive, which The Quarry had that issue too. A lot of the characters were just insufferable. I know that's one of the things that the game is marketed on, that you can kill off the entire cast, but come on, man. Until Dawn, it's just a game you play once as a streamer or as a YouTuber, and then again, it just rides the pine. Another pick for an overrated game, Prey. Prey is really good for about 8 hours, and it would be a great game if it was only 8 hours, but it's north of 15 hours, and sadly, I think that a game with this slow of a pace has no right being this long. People often complain about games being too short, but I think that in a lot of cases, especially with survival horror games, shorter is better, and Prey, again, after 8 hours of playing, I just had to throw in the towel. It's a shame because I was really enjoying the game. You can actually go to my personal Twitter and find me praising the game, but when I found out that you kind of had to do a lot of the side content to get the best ending, that's kind of when I uninstalled. I was like, you know what, this game is already long enough as it is without doing the side content, and now I have to do it to get the best ending? Come on, that's just moving on. Now onto underrated horror games, and like I said earlier, I think most horror games tend to be properly rated one way or another, and again, there was another repeat mention in that of Daymare 1998 or even Chernobylite, but like with The Trash of Us 2, I've spoken about it in prior chapters. I could have gone with Saw 2, but I only played about 2 or 3 hours of it, but for a movie tie-in, it was pretty solid. If this was 3 years ago, I'd say Alan Wake, but it's been given a second life with the remaster leading up to its long-awaited sequel, and Alan Wake to me was more overlooked than underrated. In fact, most of the games I considered are more overlooked than underrated. Like Ghostbusters from 2009, that was a great game. It even had the original cast back to voice their characters. Ghostbusters, that was a really good blend of sci-fi, horror, and comedy, and I was really happy it got a remaster a few years ago. For underrated, I'm going to go with a game that I don't think is too underrated, maybe more overlooked, and maybe I'm overrated it, and maybe it's because it's lost amongst its peers, but I have to talk about Resident Evil Revelations. Now, this might be a hot take within the Resident Evil community, but I actually think that Revelations is a top 7, maybe even top 6 Resident Evil of all time. I know that's a bold statement, but hey, I stand by it. I will die on that hill. I think Revelations for its time was a good blend of modern and older Resident Evils. The story was really good for Resident Evil standards, and the pacing was superb, and playing as various characters trying to piece together this mystery, that was a nice change from the norm. When it comes to Revelations, there's really not much to dislike, aside from the puzzles being a little on the forgetful side, but in the end this was a DS game, and I think that kind of ties into how the game's pacing was. The gameplay had plenty of modern enhancements, but the overall tension and feelings of claustrophobia when you're on board the ships, that really took you back to the days of old within the Spencer estate. Plus, it did a good job of being creepy, and the Resident Evil games, they usually aren't creepy in terms of the vibes and settings like it was in Revelations. I know in the more recent Resident Evils we've got, they've tried to steer it back towards, the more horror aspect, where a lot of the locations are more darker and decrepit, but at that time, no one really did it like Revelations. Just being on this ship in the middle of nowhere, it added an extra layer of loneliness, and like we mentioned back in chapter 37 with the October Selects and talking about Black Mesa, loneliness is a pretty big aspect of horror. If you've somehow never played any of the Resident Evil games, or you know someone who hasn't played the Resident Evil games, Revelations 1, that is one of the best places to start. I know the newer games are a lot more attractive, but Revelations, for a DS game, it's very, very good. The raid mode is pretty, it's kind of there just to have a bonus mode, but otherwise Revelations, to me, that is one truly underrated survival horror game. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know down below what horror games you think are underrated, what horror games you think are overrated. Inshallah, I will see you in the next chapter.